Have you fallen into an open manhole recently? Do you find yourself in the company of strangers? Well, then you might very well be in the feature Underground. Away from keyboard, my name is Hunter Lanier, and I am here today with a review of the brand new Ari Aster original, Eddington, which is one of the best and gutsiest movies I have seen all year. After shriveling into a raisin from watching Jurassic World: No: Rebirth, I am happy to report back that my love of movies has been fully restored. Quick disclaimer, as you may have heard, Eddington takes place during a certain global event that I have heard YouTube videos will get demonetized for mentioning. So just to be safe, I will hereby refer to that particular global event as the Jerry Lewis. At the risk of being reductionist, Eddington is a comedy of posturing. And it is a tragedy of posturing. It uses the small New Mexico town of Eddington as a microcosm for the country at large, cramming the culture war battles of the Jerry Lewis era into the context of small town politics and relationships. Eddington is the kind of idyllic American town where everyone knows everyone, or at the very least, everyone knows someone who knows someone. As an example, the sheriff has a contentious past with the mayor, whose ne'er-do-well son is trying to date a quixotic activist, who is herself the ex-girlfriend of a crypto bro deputy who reports to the sheriff. And so on and so on. All of the characters in the film have very few degrees of separation between them. The Jerry Lewis acts as a spark that lights the dry gunpowder that has been amassing through the decades from all of these pre-existing relationships. And there you have the movie. What you're probably wondering now is, what perspective does Ari Aster take on the Jerry Lewis moment? After all, the culture war and its greatest battle, the Jerry Lewis, have taught us that there are only two sides, and that we must, in fact, wholeheartedly throw our allegiance to one of them, right? Wrong. I'm very happy where Ari Aster comes down in Eddington, because the thesis of the movie can be boiled down to everything is stupid. For those of us who have long been conscientious objectors in the culture war, refusing to take up arms in intellectual slap fights, and review movies based on how woke or unwoke they are, Eddington feels like a break in the clouds. And I realize that's ironic because the movie is actually quite bleak. Aster presents all of the hypocrisies and absurdities of the Jerry Lewis moment pretty much without comment or exaggeration. Citizens mimetically pull out their phones to record events. Impressionable relatives who have lost their faith in institutions turn to online influencers who speak confidently on conspiracies and self-help remedies. The same people who had a religious devotion to social distancing are the next day gathered in large groups, protesting police brutality. White 20-somethings parrot social justice talking points like pull-string dolls, proselytize the inherent evils of whiteness while also proclaiming they don't have a right to talk about racism at all, and then end every argument with the reminder that we are on stolen land. I could go on and on, but my point is that Ari Aster captures the very particular moving parts of the Jerry Lewis moment very well, with a great ear and eye, and to great comedic effect. Aside from just saying that this is all very dumb, I think the movie's B thesis is that the Jerry Lewis moment brought out the worst in everyone. You can easily imagine a world in which every ill-fated character from the film goes on to live a relatively normal life should the Jerry Lewis never happen. They're all varying degrees of likable and intelligent, but you can see how their worst qualities are exacerbated by the moment. Not a single character in this film rises to the occasion. The occasion grabs them by the ankles and drags them to hell. But in addition to the Jerry Lewis, there is one other culprit. Pay attention while you're watching the movie and you'll find that all of the darkest turns that it takes are initiated through a screen. Phones, TV, and social media act as this sulfur scented breath in everyone's ear, whispering paranoia and promises. Just as an example from a moment that's very early in the movie, it's not a spoiler, I promise. The sheriff of Eddington, Joe Cross, who is played by Joaquin Phoenix, gets a little dopamine rush from this flattering Facebook post, which is enough to inflate his ego with dreams of running for mayor, thereby kicking off the worst period of his life. This also hints as to why I called the film a comedy and tragedy of posturing. Almost all of the trouble that is caused in the movie is a result of characters trying to be something they're not in order to get noticed for one reason or another. The film also made me reassess the entire Jerry Lewis lockdown time because it got me thinking of that lockdown era as a time when our societal waters stopped flowing and became stagnant. Everyone stopped moving and we're staying in one place. And what happens when waters become stagnant? Bacteria and parasites develop. There's no natural filtration through movement. Disgusting insects lay eggs. Eddington, and perhaps the world at large, gets most in trouble when it stops moving. Up to this point, I have talked a lot about the Jerry Lewis and the various ideas in the movie. But one thing that I think is important not to look past is that at the end of the day, this is a film about Joe Cross, the sheriff. The Jerry Lewis is the flavor, but the broth that holds the story together is very much character based. It's actually very similar to Beau is Afraid, but more traditionally plotted, in that it's about a man who is simply not emotionally equipped enough to hold himself together in a world that is really keen on tearing him apart. And for all of Joe Cross's actions in the film, there's a fragility to Phoenix's performance, much of which I think just comes from Joaquin Phoenix himself, that really muddies your feelings about him. And this is true for the film as a whole, which is very tonally challenging. At my press screening, which included both press and non-press, I sensed a lot of confusion in the audience. People were making loud comments, misreading the situation. People were forcing themselves to laugh and then immediately regretting it. People were clapping at truly horrific events. Now, I'm not saying you're a terrible person if you clap at something terrible that happens on screen. This movie in particular sets you up to clap for that moment on purpose. My point is that the film is so tonally amoral that it confused the hell out of my audience, which I think is just fantastic. You could tell that they were very much looking for heroes and villains, characters to root for and against, and every time they would latch onto someone, the film would pull out the rug from under them. Considering how conditioned the average filmgoer is to by movies like Jurassic World, Superman, Fantastic Four, to see films and stories in terms of very binary definitions of good and evil, they've also been conditioned by the entire Jerry Lewis saga to see politics and current events in those same terms. And Eddington just does not cater to that level of thinking. I thought Hereditary and Midsummer were good, but I didn't think they were the masterpieces that other people thought they were. It wasn't until I saw Beau was Afraid when Ari Aster caught my attention. And Eddington very much feels like a progression from Beau is Afraid. It's an agitator of a film that breaks out of every box that you attempt to put it in. And that kind of attitude, I think, is sorely lacking in the current crop of young filmmakers. As a quick but relevant aside, I am currently playing Hideo Kojima's new game, Death Stranding 2, and a news story came out that reportedly Kojima decided to rework the game midway through development because playtesters were liking it too much. Liking it too much. That's what artistic integrity looks like. Not meeting the audience where they are, but leading them to new places. And I think Aster has that same integrity. And before I get off this topic of tone, I do want to say that even though I said the film was tonally amoral, I think the story itself actually does have a very traditional set of moral values. But to talk about that any further would get into spoilers, so I won't. I do wonder how this movie will be viewed in 50 years, aside from its reputation, which I think will continue to rise as we get farther away from the real life baggage of the Jerry Lewis. There are so many Jerry Lewis references that you kind of had to be there and be online to grasp that future generations might struggle a bit with the nuances of the movie. Even I, 5 years removed, had to be explained a moment in the movie because I had totally forgotten about the whole losing your taste thing. Will the film eventually become a huge cultural inside joke that future film buffs will have to do homework for to fully enjoy? I don't know. That's actually a good question for the comments. What are some movies that are so closely tied to a specific event or cultural moment that require prior education before fully enjoying? Let me know because I am truly curious because I can't think of any myself offhand, except for maybe those Cold War movies that dealt with the paranoia of nuclear war and the Red Scare, like 7 Days in May and Failsafe and Dr. Strangelove, of course, and Billy Wilder's 1, 2, 3. Although I think the Jerry Lewis moment will end up being a little more historically niche than the Cold War. So that might not be the best example. Let me know in the comments what you come up with. Oh, and if I could ask Ari Aster one question about this movie, I would ask him, do you hate young Mr. Lincoln? Once you see the movie, you will understand the question. Well, those are all my thoughts on Eddington. Now is the time for you to let me know your thoughts on my thoughts. I'm sure this one will be contentious, so I am very curious to read everyone's opinion. But one thing I think we should all be able to agree on is a certain degree of respect for a director like Ari Aster making something that is wholly authentic to his own artistic impulses. Even if you hate the movie, I don't think you can call it pandering or boring or routine, all of which are among the deadliest of the cinematic sins. Next up, I will be seeing Fantastic Four. I wasn't planning on it initially, but the press screening is at a theater that is much closer to me than they normally are. So there you go. Until then, I remind you, as always, Jerry Lewis or no Jerry Lewis, that every day underground is a good day.